Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, good whatever time of day it is right now. Thank you for tuning in to the Conversations with Dr. Don show. The show is produced and broadcast from Portland, Oregon, USA. Now, for your first-time viewers, Conversations with Dr. Don is an ongoing series of one-hour standalone talk shows where I interview interesting people, like most of you out there, about who they are as unique, one-of-a-kind individuals, and about whatever it is we've decided to talk about. Tonight we're going to talk mostly about the brainwashing of the American people. I had to double-check that title, The Brainwashing of the American People. And my guest, Dr. Bob Seward, is going to talk about that, and he's got some good research behind him. And I know a little about what he's going to say, and I agree with him before we even start. Thanks for coming on again.
Thank you.
And he's been on in the past with the Mad as Hell doctors and others, and he's been so successful as a guest, we're going to probably have him on again in the future. So we're going to do a rather abbreviated bio section so that in case we've got viewers who have not seen you before and not know who you are, so we'll go through it a little bit anyhow, okay? So how are you feeling right now?
Feeling good.
Good. Are you nervous?
A little bit.
Oh, good. I'm glad. Most people say, well, I'm fine. And they're shaking all over the place like I am right now. I'm always impressed with a person with a MD particularly, as I will still look at those kinds of guys as special from my childhood or something. I mean, I spent so much time in my life in and out of hospitals as a child in New Orleans with one surgery.
They did a good
another.
job.
They did a good job.
Because you're in a retirement age, definitely.
Yeah.
So they must have done good.
I'll be 89 in December of this year.
Boy, I hope I look as good as you do, 89.
Thank you.
Yeah.
All right, so let's get started. If I were to ask your best friend, who is Bob, what would he or she say? Your best friend, be your best friend, and you're talking about you. Bob is what?
Good guy, good friend,
Uh-huh.
a nice guy. He's honest,
Mm-hmm.
and he's always interested in stuff, and he's kind of fun to be around.
Uh-huh. Why do they say you're a nice guy?
Because I
I knew the answer to that. I know you. And when and where were you born?
I was born in Berlin, Wisconsin, small farm town, and 80 miles north of Madison.
Mm-hmm.
In fact, I just got back from my 60th high school reunion, and I graduated in 1957. And
When were you born?
1940.
40, okay. And why were you born?
I guess, well, my parents loved each other, and they were expressing their love for each other, and good things happen
Yeah.
once in a while.
Any deep philosophical reason as to why you were born?
You know, I think life is a huge mystery. It really is.
Mm-hmm.
The longer I go, the more humble I get. And it's just it's an amazing process when you think about it. If you've ever seen under a microscope a sperm or an egg, and you think, out of this is a huge person with a brain, with a very complex body that they're still studying, you know.
And the
So,
results of that merging can be all over the darn place.
yes.
So people still say you're a nice guy, huh?
I think so.
They've got evidence?
My kids. I'll use those as evidence, Your Honor.
They all like
I'll present my children as witnesses, Your Honor.
Yeah, okay. And anything significant about your cultural or racial or national heritage that's worth mentioning to the viewers?
My
Dairy farmer?
my father was raised on a small farm. He knew what hard work was. My mother was a part of a Norwegian community in southeast Wisconsin. She was raised on a farm. They both saw their parents work their fingers to the bone. And that experience helped them in life because they were independent, they knew how to work, and they were always busy doing something. I mean, if you're a dairy farmer, you don't sit down. You got to keep moving.
Those cows need attention
Yeah,
all the
exactly.
time.
So, you know, my mother was Norwegian community. My father was English, I guess, and his father was, and his uncles were broke horses out in South Dakota. They were part of the migration out there in 1902. They offered 160-acre plots to go out and put your stake in the ground and build a little hut and do what you know, try to make a living. And so that's what my grandfather did when he was 21. When he was 21, he put 20 head of cattle in a freight car, went out to South Dakota, built a sod hut.
A sod hut.
Yeah. Yeah. And so they were very independent people. And then they got flooded. The Indians came across the river and said, don't build there, it'll flood. But what do they know, right? So they built it there, and they got flooded out 2 years later, and they went back to the
darn
Midwest.
Redskins.
Yeah. So they were hardworking people.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
everybody worked hard back then.
Do you have stories that they told you about those times, even before you were born, about how it was for them doing the work they did there and being on the land?
Well, I like a lot of people, I regret that I didn't listen more to them when I was growing up. When I was growing up, I was interested in myself. And I wish I'd have spent more time with my grandparents and asked them these questions. But I had my aunt, Ethel, was a genealogist, and she actually did a genealogy and a family history and wrote a book about it. I mean, a big pamphlet. So
How long ago was that she wrote that? A long time ago?
60s, maybe.
Oh my gosh, okay. But it's a current fad right now for everybody to do that, yeah.
Yeah.
So, do you have a religious preference nowadays?
I go to church. I would say I'm a more or less, like my parents, more or less agnostic. I'm not sure.
Mm-hmm.
But I think that the lessons of Jesus are practical rules of how to live.
Yeah.
And so I go to the AME church. I started going there 3.5 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
And I've learned a lot. I've gained a lot of inspiration from the people.
And
that
they
go there.
accept you as an agnostic?
They've never asked me.
Okay.
I mean, I take communion. What I'm saying is,
Sure.
I'm a very humble person, and I'm not one to preach to other people.
Mm-hmm.
So,
How about a few words about your formal education? You went to a bunch of different schools.
High school education. I was very lucky. I went to the University of Wisconsin in my undergraduate, and I went there as my medical school. I was very blessed. I had opportunities that a lot of people don't have. And then I had my postgraduate education in Milwaukee, Santa Clara, San Jose, California. And then I had 3-year residency in internal medicine. And so, like I say, I was very blessed to have that kind of training to prepare me for a career in medicine.
What do you mean when you say, I was blessed? What does that mean? You're blessed.
Lucky.
Okay.
I mean, I drive down the street and I see, one of the great things about being in medicine, you feel sorry for yourself. I had to get up at 5 o'clock, blah, blah, blah. You walk in the hospital and you see these wrecks. people in wheelchairs, people suffering, people dying, and you say, why am I feeling sorry for myself? I am lucky. You know? And so medicine does that for you. It keeps you humble.
Mm-hmm. And you never lose that, your compassion and sensitivity for others in distress or pain.
I think I remember the courage that people have and what they would expect of me, and that I would have as much courage as they have, you know, the things that they went through.
Mm-hmm. And they put a lot of faith in you being the doctor, right?
Yes, absolutely. We'll get into that in a minute.
Okay. So.
Because I've seen some bad doctors too, but anyway, we'll get to that.
Yeah. You've been retired now for 10 years.
Correct.
And what do you do in your retirement? I know you're somewhat of a political activist.
I am. I'm active in the Democratic Party in Washington County. I exercise, golf, read, and I'm involved with my children a lot.
What kind of reading do you do?
Well, I got some examples. I just bought a couple books for you. In fact, I got this one here.
Mm-hmm.
I read political stuff.
I know that. Political stuff, so am I. I'm a political animal too.
Here's a book that I just picked up by accident. And
Be Free or Die. The amazing story of Robert Smalls.
It's going to be a bestseller.
Escape from slavery to Union hero. This is written fairly soon.
Yeah, this year. And I would recommend people go down to Powell's bookstore and go to the African American history section.
Mm-hmm. This is in Portland, Powell's bookstore.
Yeah.
Did you read it already?
Did I what?
Did you read the book yet?
I'm halfway through it.
Uh-huh.
But it's a story about Robert Smalls, who was a slave, and it's an amazing story of heroism. He's a brilliant man. He became a hero of the Union Army. It's just a crazy story.
Mm-hmm.
The thing, I'm sure they'll make a movie about it.
Okay.
But he was a slave, and he started working on these small little watercraft, the little steamers, in the harbor around Charleston, and he learned the craft. He learned how to run the boat. He was a smart guy.
Uh-huh.
And so he had this dream of getting away, escaping, using that boat to escape, and he pulled it off. It's an incredible story.
Someone told me about this before. What you're saying is kind of familiar to me.
Mm-hmm.
Has there been a TV show about this, or?
There might be. I don't know.
Okay, but anyhow, it was deucedly interesting. So I'll check back with you as you get to the end.
Yeah.
And let me know your overall impression.
Okay.
So what are you doing besides your political activities? You do some exercising and
Golf.
You play golf. And do you go to movies at all?
Once in a while, yeah.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So, and your children, how many are there?
My daughter, Christy, lives in Forest Grove.
Mm-hmm.
She's a teacher.
That's
She
in
and her
Oregon?
husband.
Mm-hmm.
My son, Matt, lives in Seattle. He works for the King County, and he is a jazz drummer.
Jazz drummer, interesting.
Yeah,
Is he good?
very good. He is.
Okay.
He's finally starting to play with some really good groups. And then my daughter, Lori, lives in Bellingham, Washington. She's a nurse,
Uh-huh.
and she has a couple kids.
Uh-huh.
So
Do they like you?
they do, as far as I can tell. I don't see my grandkids enough, and but I think I have a relationship with them, good relationship with them.
How old are they?
Let's see, Henry's
Roughly.
13, Gus is 8, Sonny is 10, and Andre is 6.
Yeah.
You're going to try to trip me up there.
Yeah. Right. And you have a wife?
Did.
Oh,
divorced,
oh, how long ago was that?
1991.
91. So you've been single all this time?
Yep.
You
Came
look-
close again later in the 90s, but I didn't go through with it because I didn't ever want to be committed to something that I wasn't really 100% excited about.
Mhm.
So,
So it's
but
somebody.
yeah,
that
you know, I date and everything, so
okay.
not like,
You're not a hermit.
I'm not a hermit.
How about your political persuasion? Need I ask that question, or can we guess?
I'm progressive. Both my parents were fierce Democrats.
Mm-hmm.
My dad was a very independent person. He and my mother signed the recall petition against Joe McCarthy.
Oh man, you got your credentials in
Yes,
order.
he had guts, and he was fearless. And some of the people in my hometown, it's a Republican area, they thought my dad was kind of a commie, you know.
Yeah.
He didn't care. And he was a veteran of World War II. He went off to serve when he was 36. He landed on Omaha Beach, D+2, survived that.
Wow.
And very dedicated. They were both generous people to the community. They gave of themselves. My dad gave money away. He put kids through college. It's quite an example to follow, you know.
So, all right. Any memberships in political or social organizations that you care to mention right now? Medicare doctors, for example.
Mattis Hill Doctors, although that's morphed into HCAO, Healthcare for All of Oregon.org. And
You're still active with them to some degree?
yes, I'm active with the Democratic Party. I'm in a group from the Unitarian Church called the Great Discussions Group. They meet every fall, and they have like 7 topics about foreign policy that they discuss.
The Unitarian Church in downtown Portland?
No, this is in Beaverton.
In Beaverton. Woof. West Hills Unitarian.
Yeah, it's near Tanasbourne.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
And, all right. Persons from the past are alive today that you look up to or admire. Any names come to mind from history or alive today?
That are alive today?
Either one. They could be gone or they're still alive today.
People from history, I think I was always an admirer of Harry Truman.
Harry Truman, why?
Well, he was one of my parents' heroes, and he was a humble guy, but he was self-taught pretty much. He only had a high school education. But they say when he left Independence, Missouri, he had read most of the books in the library. He was familiar with classic literature. He was innately curious. He was my grandfather on my mother's side had only a 3rd grade education, but when he died, he was an educated man because he educated himself. So Harry Truman, the black sports heroes, Bill Russell,
Basketball.
Jackie Robinson, and then the civil rights heroes, Martin Luther King, and John Lewis, who's still living.
Fantastic human being. John
I mean,
Lewis.
they're giants. They're giants. And then people that I've known in practice, one of the guys that I practiced with, Tim Zimmerman, who practiced out of a wheelchair for 30 years.
Out of a wheelchair?
Yep.
What kind of a medical doctor was he? Or is he? Is he still alive?
He was a great doctor. He was in practice in Wisconsin, and he had a car accident. He was 33. He had 3 kids. He had graduated from medical school, and his car went off the road in a ditch. He laid there all night, and he would have fractured his spine. He laid on a striker frame for a year and a half. Then he went back into practice and practiced for 30 years out of that wheelchair.
Oh, for gosh sakes.
He
what
was
a human spirit.
Exactly. He was a mountain of courage.
Mm-hmm.
So he's one of my heroes. And then, you know, there's people in my life that I looked up to. So
Did you pick up any of their qualities that made you the nice guy that you are?
I hope so.
What was it about Dr. King that turned you on to him?
Not initially. I mean, he came to Madison, and I marched in a civil rights march, but being a white kid, I didn't really know what was going on. I knew it was wrong. I knew what was wrong that was happening to the black Americans, and I marched, but I didn't really understand the danger he was under every day. They're threatening to kill him. They killed children. I didn't understand the real impacts of racism and what he had to endure, and that he chose a nonviolent way to go. It was just amazing.
Early on for me, I thought rather similarly about Dr. King, because on the one side of him, there were the people who were more militant and more angry, and their causes were just, I think.
Right, Malcolm X.
Yeah, and he came around and became more open about the reality and kindness. And then, anyhow, I feel similarly about him. And I had my awakening as time went by, seeing it, what he was about. And when he finished, he talked about Vietnam War, and he was more than just racism he was battling. He was battling classism and those kinds of things. But we're
He was
getting
ahead of his time. He had,
yeah,
like great leaders, he had vision.
yes.
He had vision. He's an amazing, amazing guy.
Yeah. We can go on and on about him, but what's right with America today? What's right with America today?
The Women's March. Most things are right. Well, we'll get into that. We have some terrible leaders in the Republican Party and a president who's amoral, sociopath. But we have a lot of wonderful people in this country. And the way they responded to this Trump election, that Women's March, I knew that we'd be all right after that.
Which Women's March are you talking about?
Well, it was the one right after where they said, "You're not my president," and they were downtown in Portland. I went with my daughter. And the second thing was the way that Senator Wyden and Senator Merkley and all the people fought for
Oregon
healthcare.
senators.
The way they fought for health care. And they were just the tip of the iceberg. It was the people that had benefited from Obamacare. The lives. People don't understand. Obamacare, ACA, has saved thousands of lives a year. 25, 30, 40,000 lives a year. And these people, they're so upset. They went to the senator's office in their wheelchairs and knocked on their doors, and they yelled at those senators. And then they were dragged off screaming to jail.
Okay, we're going to get into the second half right now, so let's take a break. But I said Oregon senators, those are U.S. senators from Oregon, those two names you mentioned. So shall we take a break, Mr. E? So, yeah. Okay, we're back. Thanks for staying tuned. And for you viewers who missed the opening of the show, Conversations with Dr. Don is an ongoing series of 1-hour standalone talk shows where I interview interesting people like most of you out there about who they are as unique, one-of-a-kind individuals and about whatever it is we have decided to talk about tonight. And we'll be talking tonight about the brainwashing of the American people. That's a pretty strong statement, the brainwashing of the American people. Bob, Dr. Seward, and I'm sure you've done your homework as we're going to talk about that. Educate me, teach me. Shall we? You want to start talking about something? I've got some questions here that you sent me, and I can lead off with those, or we can let you start this discussion.
Yeah. I think I want to do kind of a Rachel Maddow. You know how she kind of goes back a few
Rachel
steps.
Maddow, I love her.
Thank God for her.
Yeah.
And MSNBC, we'd be in deep trouble. But go back a couple steps.
Sure.
Before we get to the brainwashing.
Mm-hmm.
And I mentioned the sociopathic personality. And I would encourage the viewers to use your internet, to Google, to learn about mental illness. For instance, if you're diabetic, you can go in and learn more about diabetes than your doctor almost.
Yes, it's amazing.
Yeah. So I would urge the viewers to educate yourself on the personality disorders. Now you can do this simply by Googling the criteria for the sociopathic personality. Criteria for antisocial personality. And this, or you can put in DSM-5. That's the criteria that the psychiatrists use to diagnose a mentally ill person. You can put that in, criteria of the sociopathic personality.
Diagnostics and Statistical Manual.
They call it the antisocial personality, but it's a sociopath. Same thing.
Yeah.
And if you go in there, they have criteria now for diagnosing mental illness. What's a schizophrenic? What are the criteria for a manic depressive? What is the criteria for the sociopathic personality? And if you go in there, you'll see there are 7 criteria for sociopathic personality. And I've written them down. I'll go over them real quick. You only need three of these. The first, failure to conform to social norms. Repeatedly performing acts that are grounds for arrest. Number 2, deceitfulness, repeated lying. Use of aliases, conning others. 3, impulsivity, failure to plan ahead. 4, irritability and aggressiveness, repeated physical fights. 5, reckless disregard for the safety of others. 6, consistent irresponsibility, failure to sustain consistent work behavior or honor financial obligations. And 7, lack of remorse, as indicated by being indifferent or rationalizing. Now there are 2 that are really important. One is the deceitfulness and lying, and the other is no remorse and no conscience. Those are the keys. The reason that's important
and the personality disorder you're talking about now, say that again.
Antisocial personality or the sociopathic personality.
Sociopathic. Does that remind you of anybody as we're looking at each other
yes.
right now?
I think if you look at Trump, for instance.
Trump? Donald Trump?
Yeah. Now, the reason I mentioned lying is a tell. Like in poker, it's a red flag. When somebody repeated lies, that is a criteria for a sociopath.
Yes.
And then the other one is no empathy, no remorse, no guilt. They can do things, they can hurt other people, even kill other people. They feel nothing. So in life, well, the other thing, I just want to back up a second. All these disorders, they're not black and white. It's not just a clear definition. They're on a spectrum, just like autism has a spectrum of high functioning to low functioning. Sociopaths, there are some that are severe, like our president, and there are some that are very mild.
How about narcissism, narcissistic personality?
Yeah, but you can do the same thing. What is the criteria for narcissism? They're not the same. They do share one thing in common, the lack of empathy.
Yes, yes.
Well, you're a psychologist. You know all this stuff. I'm not.
I'm checking to see if you know what you're talking about.
But the reason I'm talking about this, I came across, it's my own experience in medicine. Second year of medical school, we heard a lecture, this was back in '64, about the sociopathic personality. We didn't know. We thought, we were medical students, we thought everybody that was crazy acted crazy. But the hallmark of these people is that they're charming. They appear normal. Just like Bernie Madoff, just like, well, I don't know, Trump doesn't appear normal.
When he had his TV show for a long time, he was...
Ted Bundy appeared normal. You know, the killer, the serial killer. These people appear normal, but they are deeply disturbed because they don't have empathy. And anyway, he told us about the sociopathic personality, and then in the second year of medical school, we had a guy in our class that was cheating. He would walk up to you and copy right off of your paper. He was cheating, and he was finally drummed out of medical school. He was a sociopath, you know. And when professionals lie, people die. You can't have liars in a field of power or influence. Then when I was in Des Moines, we had a resident there in training, and the PA asked him to do a physical on this person. What'd the physical show? He made up half of it. He went in the other room and made up stuff, and he said the abdomen was normal.
PA, physician's assistants?
Yeah. So she went in there, and this guy had this humongous hernia. Obviously he hadn't examined the person. He lied. He lied. So I don't know if they drummed him out or not. And then when I was in practice, several physicians, one PA, were liars. They should have been drummed out of practice.
In the medical school. Yeah. And what kind of a practice did you have as a physician?
Internal medicine.
Okay.
And of course, there's a book written called Blind Eye by Jonathan Stewart about a serial killer. He was a resident in like 15 years ago in Illinois, and went to Ohio State. He ended up killing like 32 patients.
I vaguely remember that.
They wrote a book about it. So, and then so what I'm saying is, recognize the hallmarks of a sociopathic personality. That brings us to what do these people do? Why is it important? Because if they get into positions of power and influence, death and destruction is going to follow. People are going to be damaged and hurt. If they go into medicine, of course, people can die. If they go into finance, they can be like a Bernie Madoff, a Wall Street broker. If they go into the military, they could be like Adolf Hitler. If they get into politics, it could be several people in the Republican Party now that really... What about these guys that voted against Obamacare 46 times, knowing that people would die if they don't get that care? They did it anyway.
That sounds pretty scary, because that number of people with those kind of defects are voting.
Well, that's what I'm saying. They have a spectrum. There are obvious ones like serial killers, but there are milder people that are, I mean, the Republican Party is shot through and through with this kind of, like Paul Ryan. Paul Ryan, he looks like a choir boy, you know, and he's very professorial. He has no heart. He has no soul. He has no remorse for trying to vote against health care.
You make a powerful argument.
Well, but what I'm saying, it's important to understand that it's a small number of men, mostly men, that have this problem, maybe 1 in 100, but they can cause a lot of damage. Now the good news is most people aren't sociopathic. You know, most people are good
Yeah.
and have empathy and love and care for their neighbors. But that 1% that doesn't have a conscience, they can cause a lot of damage.
Of course.
Yeah. And that brings us to the Trumpster. And it also brings us to, what if one of these sociopaths who doesn't care got a hold of a big media company like Rupert Murdoch? Rupert
Wow.
Murdoch was in England, and he divided England, used the race card to divide the blacks against the whites in England. Then he came here, and they created Fox News. And what has Fox done? Fox has used racism, bigotry, prejudice, fear to build this huge market. You know, and that brings us to the brainwashing. Because if somebody of power gets into a period of influence, they can do a lot of damage. What if they become a preacher and they invent a religion called Scientology? L. Ron Hubbard, a complete faker, faked his military record, a liar, a sociopath, founded a religion. I'm going to leave a book for you afterwards called Going Clear. It's about...
I've heard of it.
Yep. And what if they get, what if they have one of these big mega churches and they're making $10 million a year off of these poor people that are giving them everything they have?
Wow.
You know? So...
What do you mean by brainwashing?
Okay.
Brainwashing. What does that term mean?
It means that you're... I mean, I'm not a professional.
Sure,
Yeah.
but you're an educated man.
Yeah. That means that you're indoctrinated and facts don't matter to you anymore. Reality doesn't matter. That you are willing to do things and accept things that are completely against your own values.
Is that a genetic given in certain persons?
No, I don't know if there's some people are more prone to this or not.
Never heard of the bad seed, huh?
Well, I think the bad. There we get into the sociopathic personality because that is genetic. There's increasing scientific evidence that the true sociopaths. The British have done MRI studies of their brains, and they found that the sociopaths lack gray matter in an area that controls the conscience.
Mm-hmm.
So I think we're getting into the science of evil.
Ooh, how new is this research you're talking about? Is it
10 years, maybe.
really?
Yeah, within the last 10 years.
Good data, good
Yeah,
research.
I have the references I can give you.
That's okay. Yeah, I believe you, of course.
Mm-hmm.
Oh my gosh.
Now, how I got into the brainwashing was, again, from personal experience. I went back to campaign for Obama and to Wisconsin in 2008 because I have property back there and family I could stay with. And we knocked on Democratic doors and we knocked on independent doors, hundreds of doors. And these are the people I grew up with. The stuff they said about Obama shocked me. Racist stuff. And then I listened to them and I said, that's Fox News. And then Fox is totally saturated. They are in basic cable, you know.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
And also the radio, right-wing radio, and I have a book about that. They basically own all the radio stations in this country, 95% of them.
Wow.
And all day long, it's our government's bad. Immigrants are horrible. The blacks are taking all these welfare checks and they're killing each other. And they may be moving into your, just horrible racism.
Mm-hmm.
They create a whole network. And so I said, these people aren't rational. It's not rational. And then the thing that really tipped the scales for me, I went back in 2010, I think it was, the campaign for Russ Feingold.
Good
Again,
man.
I was knocking on doors in these small rural towns near where I grew up. There was Democrats, independents, and the stuff they said about Obama. Come on. I grew up here. I don't remember any racism. Of course, that's because I'm white.
What happened to those people you're talking about now that they have this kind of
and then it came
brainwashing?
Yeah, and then they believe everything. They don't think critically. Facts don't matter. And they've interviewed these people that voted for Trump. They still think Obama was born in Kenya. They still believe all these things that are untrue. They don't believe in science.
So somebody has
How do you get a people, supposedly normal, rational people, not to believe in science? Well, listen to Fox. You know, it's not just the uneducated. I have a classmate of mine from medical school that voted for Trump. I caught him watching Fox. And that's why I led in with the discussion of a sociopathic personality who doesn't care about all the pain that he's going to inflict on people. Promoting racism is evil. It's evil. People get, racism kills. And then they went into this, and then I think this conservative ideology is another form of it's kind of a cult. It's a doctrine of selfishness and greed. They call it conservatism. What does that mean? Limited government. Like what?
What does it really mean? There are other meanings.
They don't want a sheriff looking over their shoulder. Well, so they can steal and they can pollute. They don't want a federal government because a strong federal government has regulations and rules and said, no, you can't steal people's money. You can't just pollute water, drinking water. And so they've turned that in, and they've used racism. So that's why I think that's a key. One of the big keys to the Trump voter was the influence of Fox and all these right-wing racist hate radios. I really do. These people are not rational. I mean, I have a classmate of mine from high school who's a businesswoman, very bright. She still doesn't believe in, I got an email from her yesterday. She's still not sure that there's climate change. There's something strange going on there.
What do we do about this situation that's going on in America? What do we do?
First of all, I think to recognize that this is happening.
Okay.
And you ask a really good question. I mean, I think there are many things that we can do. One, recognize that start listening to stations that are journalists and use facts.
Yeah.
Listen to PBS. Support your PBS. Listen to, I like MSNBC. I mean, Rachel is a fact-based thing.
I like Lawrence O'Donnell.
I love Lawrence O'Donnell. So support them. I think we should discuss this as a nation. We should discuss the fairness doctrine, enforcing it, and break up these media companies that have a stranglehold on the radio.
How do we do that?
I know it's really hard.
And then of course it's hard.
Teaching critical thinking skills in school. Teaching history in school. We don't teach history. We don't teach the Constitution. We don't teach critical thinking. Teach science.
Why don't we do what you just said? And I'm going to stop this.
Okay.
I got you on the spot.
Why don't we do this?
Yeah. You mentioned earlier Fox News and those kinds of people and people in charge of the information we're given to render our decisions about what's important in life.
I think I wish we would have a big discussion panel on that, what to do. I mean, it's a very hard problem. And it's not just Americans. Look at what happened in Germany before the war. How people went along, and by the time it was too late, you know. So, and I think there's other examples, and I'll give you a couple books on that. One is the Jonestown. But he was a sociopath that used religion to draw people in to his little web, and he was the evil spider there. He drew all these people in, got them to Jonestown, and then they all took poison. Why did that happen? Most of them were good people.
Yeah.
And Scientology. Read about Scientology. Read the book called Going Clear by Lawrence Wright. Highly intelligent people in Hollywood were drawn into this cult.
Yeah.
Read Franklin Schaffner's books. He was, I think, Billy Graham's son, or he was the son of one of the evangelicals. And so I think it's something that needs to be taught in schools. But what to do about it is, first of all, I think we have to recognize, I think our politicians should start calling out Fox News. They pander to them. They ought to say, no, that's a false story.
Who own the politicians?
Well, I think...
Okay, I'm going to stop trying to squeeze
Yeah.
you. Going to the point, we need to figure out what we can do and do it in order to have people who speak for us in this democracy in America are not owned by the super rich or the people who need money and power to be of some importance.
You're talking about Citizens United, maybe, getting rid of that.
I'm talking...
Campaign finance reform.
Yeah, campaign finance reform, and arrange the electoral process such that ordinary citizens' voices are heard when it comes to making laws and deciding these important issues to do with human welfare and human decency and social responsibility. So as long as we have those kinds of people running our government and making those kinds of decisions, we're going to have the kinds of opinions and the kinds of views that the voting populace exercise. And they then are brainwashed. That's where brainwashing comes in for me. And it seems like an impossible task. But Martin Luther King and people like that didn't consider anything impossible. Those people, like even slavery and women's suffrage, there were certain people who decided, no, never mind how impossible it seems. There's no such thing as impossible.
I'm actually I think that this Trump, because we have MSNBC, because of our wonderful papers like New York Times, Washington Post, and all those reporters, and Robert Mueller, and our institutions, that most people, and I worked in the federal government 15 years at the VA. 98% of the people that work in the federal workforce are dedicated people.
Yeah.
And they're not there to make millions, because they don't make millions. They make a salary and they make a living. And it's those institutions that are going to save us. And people, that's the other thing that's most evil about Murdoch and the conservatives that I really resent as much almost as racism, that they have denigrated our government.
Yes. Yeah.
They're terrible. They don't call them public servants. They call them bureaucrats. Those bureaucrats are screwing us up again.
The language.
Look who's saving those lives down in Florida right now. The federal government, the FEMA, the Navy. I'm a big believer in our federal government. Big believer in it.
Of course. Not the federal government as it stands now.
Well, the Constitution, is about the federal government. The Constitution is not a state constitution. It's a federal, and it's the federal government that won the Civil War.
Right.
And the federal government that created civil rights and stuff like that upholds the law. So I think I think we should have a strong federal government because we got big problems.
Yes. Yes. But my point is that we need to do whatever it is. We've got to do something, even if it's like, and I'm bragging now, I wear my political signs all over the place, and I engage people in discussions, and I have my TV show. And each individual American can decide what it is that he or she can do that demonstrates a resistance to this kind of brainwashing, and having an electoral process that is so dedicated to the right wing and to money and power until they follow the dictates of the super rich and the government behind the scenes, the deep government.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm not a conspiracy theorist, but there is some evidence that this goes on now. There are some people behind the scenes that are manipulating and deciding how our government should perform on the world scene so that they can continue to make more money and have more riches and more
absolutely.
power. Yeah. So we got to curb that.
Yeah.
For example, a wild idea, we could have a wealth tax or a limit on the amount of wealth that an individual can accumulate. And I think Roosevelt did something like that.
Of course, we've lowered the tax rates way, way down. And that's a big mistake. That, you know, paying taxes is patriotic. You're supporting our government.
You sound subversive. You sound like you're one of those commies.
Commie, yeah.
So, you mentioned Katrina earlier on in New Orleans, and I think your experiences there lent your thinking to how it is you are, the way that you are, and as far as social justice and human decency and what's right and what's wrong. And when you were there in Katrina, say a few words about when you were there as a medical doctor.
The federal government, through the Surgeon General, asked for physicians and nurses and pharmacists to go to New Orleans and help out with writing prescriptions and basic first aid.
Sure.
And so I went there, and they flew us down. We stayed in Baton Rouge, and they sent us as 8-man teams into, well, the first time was 9th Ward.
Mm-hmm.
And we had a public health officer, 2 physicians, 3 nurses, pharmacist, a social worker, like 8-man teams.
Mm-hmm.
We went in there. They set up a picnic table. And on one picnic table, the nurses gave hepatitis shots, tetanus shots, immunizations. And on the other table, they had 4 physicians with a blood pressure cuff and a prescription pad.
And the federal government set you guys in, these teams in.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
It was this federal program. And it was amazing, because we get there in the morning, there'd be 100 people lined up, and they had lost their medications in the flood. You have to see the flood to appreciate it. I walked down this one street, and there was a little maple tree there, and about 15 feet up was a washer dryer, either the washer dryer or some appliance.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
They've been floating around, and and it got stuck in this tree.
Yeah.
And you see the damage to the homes. It's not distilled water that comes into your home, it's sewer water.
Well, of course.
Yeah, it's horrible. And so these people had just been through a nightmare. We heard all these life-threatening stories. And I remember one specific thing that really got my attention. One of the things that reinforced my healthcare thing.
Mm-hmm.
Black man came in, and he was in his 50s. He had 5 kids. He was a working man. I don't know what, electrician or something. He'd run out of his blood pressure medicine.
Mm-mm.
So I checked his blood pressure. It was 230 over 130. He was fine. He felt okay. I'm like, God, that's almost like have to put him in the hospital.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So I gave him his 2 prescriptions, and I ordered a 3rd drug. 2 days later, he came back, and he was his pressure was like 135 over 90 or something. And I realized this guy was walking around. That's why they call high blood pressure the silent killer. And I realized he's not alone. All over this area that people are not getting health care and they're having strokes.
Can you summarize in the next 30 seconds or so? Because
Yeah, well,
we're
that's
out of
why I
time.
became so passionate about the Mattis Hill doctors.
Mhm.
That we have all these people that don't have health care.
Well, we need more like you. And I guess a lot of people like you now are working in Florida in those kinds of situations and in Texas now.
But you see what happened here. Just really quick. 19 states refused to expand Medicaid. These 19 states were Republican governors and white people, white governors. They're white, they're Republican, including Texas and Florida. That 4.3 million people have not received health care in the last
Okay,
6 years.
I'm going to stop you now. I want you to look at the camera and tell the viewers out there, you got about 30 seconds more to
Okay.
give them some final thoughts or words
Okay.
about anything you want to say right now, please.
I would say that there is hope, that most people are good, and get active. Get off your couch, read about the candidates, get involved. If you don't like what the Democratic Party is doing, go down there and raise heck with them and say, we should be doing this. But get active, vote, be involved. Because if you're not involved, a sociopath will be involved.
Okay.
And the last thing, there's 4 things here. Because
You have 5 seconds.
okay, love, courage, the Constitution, and science.
Thank you very much,
That'll
Robert.
get us through.
Well, I don't know if we have time for a PSA or not, but I'm supposed to thank you and say good night. Thanks for watching. And remember KFC. Kentucky Fried Chicken, not Kentucky Fried Chicken, Dr. Don's KFC. Kind, friendly, and charitable. Be kind. Be friendly. Be charitable. To you too. And you too. And you too. And thanks for
Thanks,
coming aboard again.
Thanks, Don. You're great.
Till the next time.